Welcome to the session Crash Course Build an App from the Ground Up. This is part 2. So if you were here with me yesterday or the day before, this is just a follow-up to that session. If you had a sandbox environment from the other day, pull that up because what we're going to be doing today builds off of that content. I just posted again the instructions in the chat window so that you can get access to the sandbox if you need it. Just a couple quick housekeeping items. This is a Zoom meeting, so if you're joining us and you want to share your video, that would be great. Please keep yourself muted. If you have questions, feel free to post them in the chat box. I'll try and stop a few times throughout the session so you can unmute and ask questions. And if you do ask a question in the chat box and I didn't understand what you're saying or I had follow-up questions, I may ask you to unmute as well. So please feel free to ask me any questions during the session at any time. And we're glad you're here. My name is Shannon Rosaire. I am the customer success manager for Build. So I and a colleague of mine take care of all things customer related after a customer joins our Build family. So let's jump right in. And I'm going to jump right over here. Okay, so I want to recap some of the things that we did in part 1, just as a reminder. I'm going to make sure I've got my chat box by me so I can follow that if I need to. Just as I want to review what we covered in part 1, just as a reminder to some of the things we've already discussed and that we've already set up. It'll set the stage for what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be focusing in this session primarily on creating the workflow and also getting into the document list. You'll remember that a document is a form that has been submitted. So a submitted form is considered a document. So today is talking about workflow and a submitted document. So once you log into Build, of course, this is your dashboard. This is where you can see the apps that you've created or that have been shared with you, and you can create a new app from here. What I want to focus on that's going to come back into our workflow today is I want to go to the Build menu, and you'll remember this is most of these things are available for system administrators, which you will see in your sandbox. But as you get into your own instance of Build, unless you're a system administrator, you won't see some of these options. However, for our purposes today and for future purposes as you go out to build your own apps, I just want to cover the groups area one more time. So you'll remember we can add users into Build. The groups allows us to create different groups or categories within the system. It allows us also to create roles and then assign users to those roles. So when we come into the groups area, you can see on the left, we have categories. Categories are a way to combine like groups. So it's a way to segment, to define, to categorize, if you will, like groups. So things such as my college's example. So this is my college's category, and colleges describes the types of groups that I have in that category. So you can see here in the center, I have the business group or the business college, the education group, engineering and technology group, or engineering and technology college. I have a subcategory of colleges, which is departments. So likewise, departments defines the type of groups within that category. And you can see here in the center, I've got the art department, the chemical engineering department, or the chemical engineering group. So however you segment your categories, your groups, your roles is totally up to you. It depends on your use case. I use this mostly because it's something that we're familiar with in higher ed. It's something that everyone's familiar with. Now, at the category level, so again, here at the departments level, I can go up to the view category option here at the top right, and I can create roles. So things like members, department chair, executive committee, and so on. These roles, once they're created at the category, will then trickle down to the groups within that category. So if I go back and I'm in my departments category and I click on biology, and this is the example I used yesterday and the day before, but if I click into biology, you can see that these roles are here. So we've got the department chair role, Leland Mueller is in that role, and then the executive committee, which has multiple people in that role. Now, when you get into workflow, it's possible to assign a workflow step like an approval or an acknowledge step to one person. So the department chair, for example, But it's also possible to assign it to a group of people or several people. I should be careful with my usage of the word groups there, but it's possible to assign it to a role that has multiple people in it. And when that happens, you can set some rules around who needs to approve the form at that point. It could be the first person that approves. It could be you have to have a certain percentage of this role approve it. So those are some things that you can set on the workflow step. So Shelley, are the groups shared among all admins at one institution? That's a good question. The answer is yes. And I'm going to clarify admins for just a second. There's two types of administrators in Build. One is the system administrator that's responsible for all of Build. The other we call app administrators. And app administrators are people that can create apps. So they can create a form, they can create a workflow combined. So they have a lesser degree of permission in the system. Now, the app administrators and the system administrators, everyone has access to all of the groups in the system. But if you're an app administrator, you may want certain groups, certain categories created a certain way so that your work and the work that your team is doing is set up accordingly. So for example, if you're a registrar, you might want specific categories, roles, and groups that another department might not want, like say research, for example. So yes, today, a short answer is my long-winded answer is saying yes, groups are shared among admins today. Other questions on the groups, roles, categories area? Okay, feel free to post in the chat window at any time. I'll try and keep my eye on it. I'm going to come back to the Build dashboard and I'm going to jump in to the app that I created yesterday. So this is, you'll remember we're creating a form for students to request getting a new major. So I'm going to jump into this form and I want to just review a few things that we created because they will be important once we get to the workflow. So you'll notice that, or you'll remember that we created this field for an advisor where the student can select from a dropdown their personal advisor. This will allow us to create an approval step for the advisor to approve. You'll also notice that we created a current department and a new department. So the student can select which department their major is in today and which new department their future major is in. That will allow us to use one of those roles that I was just talking about to approve these forms. The other thing that we showed you yesterday was this option for to create a radio button. So how many times have you requested a change to your major? First time, 2 to 3, 4 plus. And if you'll remember, we made this question, why are you requesting a change? We made that question available only if someone selected 4 plus. So there was some limited visibility on that particular question. Now, the visibility on that question isn't going to matter for workflow, but this question here, how many times have you requested a change to your major, will? Because based on what they respond here, we're going to do some different approval processes for each of these. The other thing that I want to point out is you'll remember we created a few sections. So if I click on the student information section header, you'll notice that I've got some student information. It's all highlighted in blue, the gadgets that are in that section. And then I created a section reason for major change. And I put some dummy gadgets in there just to show you some of the features of Build. And you can see all of the gadgets that are in that section highlighted in blue. That will also become important later with some of the options that are available in workflow. The gadgets that I have here don't matter as much, except for like the one I pointed out already. So those are just some few things I want to point out so we can show you some additional functionality in workflow. Okay, so we've got our form set up. We'll just pretend it's perfect, even though it's really not the best new major form in the world, but you get the idea. And we're going to jump into workflow. Now, once you come into workflow, you'll notice that we've got our workflow steps over here at the right. And our first step is always form submission. So the form is submitted. What happens after the user submits the form? And then you can choose from a step or a series of steps to drag into your workflow. The approval step is what you think it is. It allows the approver, the reviewer, to approve, deny, or even send back the form for changes. Acknowledge is, I kind of call this the courtesy step. You're sending a notification to someone to let them know that a form has been submitted. They can look at it if they want. They can say that they've seen it if they want, but it doesn't impact the progression of the workflow. The workflow will continue whether or not they look at the form. Notification allows us to customize some email notifications that will go out to individuals throughout the process. We'll talk more about that. Branch will allow me to create different steps or different paths based on how a user responds to a question in the form. So that's why I was pointing out that question, like how many times have you requested a new major, is because we're going to branch based on how they answer that question. And then an integration allows you to push data to an endpoint of your choice. We won't get into that too much today, but just know that there is some basic integration functionality there with workflow. Okay, so let's keep things pretty basic for now. We're going to go ahead and click on the approval step, and we're going to drag it into our workflow panel. And you'll notice again the drop zone, just like we had in the form builder, there's that blue drop zone that tells us where that step will appear. And it's going to show up right after form submission. The configuration panel will open at the right, and we're going to give this step a label. Now you'll notice in our green approval box, it just says approval today. If we don't give the step a label, it's going to continue to say approval. We don't want that. We want something there so we can identify what part of the process we're at. So I'm going to call this advisor approval. I'm going to have the student's advisor approve their form once it's submitted. Then we get to select who's going to approve this step. First is person in a role of a group or the group's hierarchy on the form. Now, the groups we're talking about here are the Kuali Build groups that we reviewed at the beginning. So, for example, if we're asking for a group to be selected on the form, which we're selecting current department and new department, we can select a role of a person in that group. So, for example, let's say the student fills out that their new major is going to be biology, and I want the chair of the biology department to review this form. I could say, okay, person in a role of a group or the group's hierarchy on the form. I'm then going to specify which field on the form. We're going to say new department, and then which role is the department chair. So what this is saying is based on how the student answers that question of new department, that department's department chair will then review the form. So if this student puts biology, the biology chair will review that form. If they put Spanish and Portuguese, the Spanish and Portuguese chair will review that form. The second option is similar, person in a role of any specific group. So it doesn't have to be referenced on the form. It could just be like, say, the university payroll group, and someone in that office needs to approve some sort of payroll change. That's what we're talking about here. A person specified on the form. This, in our case, is what we actually want to use. So, for example, we want the student's advisor. You'll remember that the student fills out the advisor form, or the advisor field rather, and that's the one that we want to pull in here. Also, the last option is any specific person. So I could type in a name and say Shannon approves every single form every single time. My recommendation is to use this sparingly. And the reason I say use this option sparingly is because we know how frequently people change positions. They get promoted, or they move departments, or they're in the chair position for 3 years and then they are no longer the chair, or whatever the case may be, or they leave the university entirely. When a personnel change happens, you then have to remember every single form that that person approves and that you've hard-coded on that form, like I did here. You don't want to have to do that. A better approach is to put that person in a role in the groups area. So then that role is always going to approve this particular step regardless of who's in the role. So for example, the department chair is always going to be the role that approves this particular step, but I can change out the assignment of department chair as much as I need to in the groups area, and it would automatically change it for all of my forms if I've selected department chair there. So hopefully that makes sense. But again, I recommend using that option, any specific person sparingly, because otherwise you'll have to change it everywhere in the system when someone changes their role. But I'm going to go back to any person specified on the form. We'll say the advisor. What happens if this gets denied? We'll talk about that here in just a minute. And customize email notifications. It is possible for you to, well, actually, let me back up. When a workflow gets to an approval or an acknowledged step in the workflow, it automatically sends a notification to the reviewers assigned to that step. So it's an automatic notification that says you have an approval. If you want to customize that notification, this is where you can do that. I'm not going to spend any time on that now, but I'll show you how to customize a notification here in a second. We'll skip everything else for now and we'll just go ahead and save. We're going to keep this very basic. So you'll notice that our form is submitted. After the form is submitted, the advisor approves that form. Now, the only automatic notifications that get sent out in the workflow process are, like I said, emails to an approver or any other reviewer, like someone who's going to acknowledge a form. Those are automatically sent out. All other notifications aren't. So for example, if you want the student to be notified that their major change has been approved, you would need to create a notification to let them know. And that's where this notification step can come in handy. Or if you want to notify somebody else that's not approving, maybe you want to send an email notification to an advisor that the whole form went through the entire process or something. That would be another reason to use the notification step. So I'm going to go ahead and drag notification in here, and I want it to happen after the advisor approval. And we're going to call this submitter approval notification. So I'm notifying the submitter that their form has been approved. Who will receive this notification? You have the same options here that you had on the approval, with one exception. You've got an additional option to send a notification to an email specified on the form. So if you want to ask the student or the form submitter, whoever, to put an email address in that form, we could then send the notification to that email address they specify. In our case, we're going to go with a person specified on the form, and we're going to select the submitter. So the person that submitted the form will receive this notification. Now I can customize the email. This email customization is the same that you saw in the approval. So you can do some customization there. The difference between the email notification like I'm in right now and the approval and acknowledge notifications is the approval and acknowledge notifications will have some set information that you can't change in those. So for example, it'll tell you what step, what approval step it's on, what action is required of you. Like, for example, you have to approve, things like that. But the basic notification, the yellow notification step, you get to provide all the content. So first of all, we can type in our email subject, your request is approved, and we can say your request is approved. Thanks, registrar. Angela, is there a glossary of terms we can access, terms used in Kuali? Yes, so let me save this step. I'll come back to it in just a second. I should say there's not necessarily a glossary, but if you come back to the dashboard and then click on the build menu and go to the help site, if I click help, it's going to take me somewhere else since I'm an employee, but it will take you to our knowledge base. It might take you to our getting started page, where then you can click on the knowledge base. Everything you want to know about stuff can be found here. You can search. It's broken out by type of action you're taking or area of the tool. So like, how do I create a form? There's a whole section on how do I create and edit a workflow, and then other workflow stuff. So those are some places that you'll want to look.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, jumping back into my form, we're going to go back to that notification step. Okay, so I've got basic content here in my email subject and email body. Now, this is fine. You can totally do this, but you can also make this a little bit friendlier, a little bit more personalized by adding some variables. So for example, let's say at the beginning of the email, I want to use the person's name. So I can click add a variable and then select a form field, and I'm going to use the student name. So it's going to say student name. It's going to say Shannon, your request is approved. I can also say your request to transfer to the blank department is approved. To the add a variable, and I'm going to pull in that new department field. So Shannon, your request to transfer to the new department, so biology department, is approved. Thanks, registrar. So those are some things you can do. Just pull in information from the fields that you created. You can also add those variables to the subject line if you want. Totally optional. So we'll save that. Back to our workflow. Form is submitted, sent to the advisor approves it, and then an email notification is sent out to the submitter, letting them know that their request is approved. Well, what happens if the form gets denied? So let's say you'll see here, advisor approval, advisor, let's say if it gets denied, if it's denied, nothing will happen, and then we're going to stop the workflow. So if nothing happens, that means literally nothing. It's just going to go into this black void. No one knows what happened to this form. And then we're going to stop the workflow. So any step after this advisor approval will not take place. And that's fine, but it would kind of be nice to let the student know that their form was not approved. So I'm going to click back into this advisor approval. And under the denial section, I'm going to say, what happens if it gets denied? Custom steps, and then we're going to stop the workflow. I'm going to save that, and you'll notice it allows me to drag additional steps down into that denial section. So if it gets denied, what do I want to have happen? Well, in my case, I just want a notification sent to the user letting them know, hey, your form was denied. Now I can create a notification. I can start from scratch, bring that down. But what's great about the workflow is I can actually copy these notification steps. So if I double click on that yellow notification box and then do those hot keys, Command C or Control C, if you're on a PC, so you can see my step was copied, and then Command or Control V, it'll copy my step. Then I can just simply drag that step into my denial box and make a few edits. So submitter denial notification, your request is denied. I can make this nicer, but I won't. Your request to transfer to the new department is denied. Thanks, registrar. Save. Okay, so much easier than having to start from scratch, find the correct variables, make sure you spelled everything correctly, just copy and paste the notification. So now if the advisor denies this, the notification will get sent and then the workflow will stop. So meaning anything after our advisor approval box, none of that will happen. If I click back into my advisor approval, I do also have the option to continue the workflow. So let me show you what that looks like. I'm going to go ahead and save this. You'll notice if it gets denied, a denial notification will get sent to the user, and the workflow will continue, meaning this next step will happen. So the submitter will also get the approval email. Now, obviously, in our case, we don't want that to happen. That doesn't make any sense. But you may have a scenario where, let's say the advisor denies a form, but the next person in line can override them. That's a situation where you may want to continue with the workflow rather than just stopping right there. In our case, though, I'm going to stop the workflow so that it stops right after that advisor approval. Crystal, can you copy and paste work for any step or just notifications? Any workflow step. So you can copy and paste, same thing. So if I double click on my advisor box here, Command C, Command V, it will copy that entire box if I want. I'm going to go ahead and delete that, which will delete, well, actually, I can delete that, which will delete everything, or I can click the undo button here at the top left, and it will just undo my previous thing, or I can redo it, bring it back if I want, undo, redo. It's a beautiful thing. So, good question. Okay, we've got our basic approval process, but let's say I want a different path for forms that have first time major request, or if they've requested it 4 times, okay? Want to have a little bit of a different path. So let's say, so in order to do that, I'm going to pull in a branch step, and I want this to branch at the beginning. So the branch step will open up my branch. I can give this a step label, which I'm not going to in this case. And then I'm going to configure my route. The first option that will appear is the default route. The default route means anything like, actually, let me show you route one. Route one is I have this special exception. These types of forms need to follow this path. Default would be used for all other forms that are not going to follow that path. So that's going to be your default route. The majority of the forms are going to follow that path, going to follow that workflow, but the special use cases, those special snowflakes will follow route one. So I can say this route will run if no match is found below, or I can say this route will never run. That is also my option too. And sometimes I do that for the default route. I just don't make it run. You can also add additional routes. So we'll just say the default route will run if no match is found below. And route one, we're going to send any first time forms through route one. So we're going to say route here when all of the following is true. And we're going to say, how many times have you requested a change to your major? And we'll say that answer to that is first time. So any person that answers this is their first time change to their major will go here. So we're going to save that. And now our branch is created. Now, if they've requested a major change one time, they'll come here, and anything else, so if they've done this 2 or 3 times or 4 or more times, they're going to go to the default route. Now for the default route, that's where I want this advisor approval to appear. So I'm going to put my advisor approval in the default route. For first time users, or first time major request changers, I should say, I just want the advisor to acknowledge. And they don't even have to. So I'm going to pull in an acknowledge step. And we're going to call this advisor acknowledgement. Again, we're going to choose a person specified on the form, which field, the advisor. And again, I can create a custom email notification here too, just like I showed you before, but I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to go ahead and push save. So let's review our option here. Sorry, my thing is accidentally typing in the chat box and I don't want it to. So if I start sending random messages in the chat box, just ignore them. It's not letting me delete it, which is so funny. Oh my goodness. Okay, ignore random messages. I'm trying to like type in the configuration panel and it's typing in the chat box. So ignore my random messages. All right, branch step. Form is submitted. User on the form says, this is my first time requesting a new major. They will get bumped down to this route down here, and which means an acknowledgement will be sent to their advisor. The advisor can say, yes, I've seen this, or no, I've seen this. And that's it. Like, we do not stop the workflow. It's the acknowledgement is sent, and then immediately after, the user will get the approval notification saying, hey, your major change has been approved. Okay. Notice how, because this submitter approval notification is outside this branch, this is where my branch is going to come together. So all routes in my branch will eventually lead here. So for example, form gets submitted, they say, this is my 4th time requesting a major change. They're going to go to the default route. Their advisor will approve it, and then it will go over here to the submitter approval notification. Okay, so basically the branches are coming together with that submitter approval. Shelley, if an approver has not responded, is there a way to prompt them? There is not a way to prompt them today. That's something that we have on our roadmap that we want to do, but I will show you how you can see who hasn't responded. So if you need to give them like a little nudge or send an email outside the system, you can do that. So I'll show you that here in just a few minutes. Good question. Okay, other questions on workflow while we're here. Maddie, we're hoping for that feature soon too. We have to manually send a lot of reminders, which takes up a lot of valuable time. Yes, we hear that a lot. That is something that we've definitely been thinking a lot about. It's behind a few other priorities. And so great question. Can we include hot links in the email? You can put links in the email. You can't change them. So if you edit a notification, for example, and put a link here, or you edit an advisor notification and put a link there, you can put a link there, but just know that that link is going to be sent out on every email that goes out in that particular step. Did that answer your question, Angela?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, you're welcome. Okay. Oh, more questions. Great. Oh, wow, lots. Good, good, good. And in case a person listed cannot approve, can you put a backup? What users are doing for that workaround is they are as a workaround, they're creating a role that has like the dean and the assistant dean in that role. And the assistant dean just knows, this is just an example, that the dean always approves unless the dean is out of the office and the assistant dean would approve. So the assistant dean would get notified every time, but it's just a business process. They know they're not going to respond. As far as having delegates in the system though, like, hey, I want to be able to say I'm on vacation. And when I'm on vacation, I want Bob to approve all my stuff. That's not a feature yet, but that is something that is on the list and that we are going to be working towards in the future. Can you speak at all about the integration option in the workflow, even if it's to say it's complicated, here's the documentation. Yeah, Rodney, it's actually pretty basic. So if I pull in the integration, a lot of people will pull it in at the end. I've got an integration set up, very basic, state accreditation office. This is an integration. Oh, I just moved my chat over everything. Sorry, trying to manage Zoom in all the different places, but all it's going to do is it's going to send all of the information that was collected in the form and then send it to an API endpoint. So it's not going to adjust the data if you need to or format it for your system. You're basically going to have to put an endpoint in there that consumes the data as we have it. So if you need it to go into a certain format in another system, you'll want to have some middleware in place that can do that. If you leave a route empty, will the workflow simply move on to the next step if a form doesn't meet the requirements for a different route? Yes, and what I would do, Rachel, in that case is I wouldn't leave a step empty. What I would do, just pull in a branch here, and I'm going to turn off the default route, just say it'll never run. I'm going to have one route and it just says when all of the following are true. When the question, how many times have you requested to change your major? When it is 4+, we're going to save it. When that answer is 4+, we're going to have just some arbitrary approval in here. We'll just call this Shannon's approval. Okay. Then what will happen is this notification, at least on our workflows path, it's not the best example, but I mean, it'll get you an idea. What will happen here is the notification will get sent out to the submitter, and after the notification gets sent out, then anybody that had answered, I've requested to change my major 4 times, will get moved here. They'll have to approve, and then the integration will fire. For anyone that did not choose 4 times, so anyone that selected first time or 2 to 3 times, they'll simply bypass this branch. So it's kind of like they'll skip it and they'll go straight to the integration. Did that answer your question? Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, couple of minutes. We've got 10 more minutes, so I'm going to move on. If you've got more questions, feel free to post them in the chat window. I've been trying to stay a few minutes after these sessions to answer additional questions, so keep posting them there. I'll answer them as I can, but I want to make sure we cover some information. Another thing I want to show you, I'm going to finish workflow really fast, is if I click on one of these steps, like approval or acknowledge, I have the option to make individual form sections at this step hidden or editable. Meaning, if I want my reviewer to add information to the form or have the ability to change information to the form, this is how I would do it. So if I toggle that switch over, you'll see that my 2 sections are listed here. So remember how in our form we had a section for student information and a reason for major change. By default right now, my approver at this step, so the advisor, can view this information, but they cannot edit this information. I have the option to hide certain information from them if I want, or allow them to edit. So let's say I had an office use only section that the advisor needed to fill out, that the submitter wouldn't see the office use only section, but the advisor would. Let's say I wanted the advisor to fill out something in that particular section. I could allow them to edit that section, but they would not be able to edit any of the other sections. And then once their step is over, they won't be able to edit anything else in the form. So I wanted to point that out, that is possible if you're interested. And then the last thing, notice at the top of the page, we have design and test. If I toggle over to test, this is going to open up our workflow simulator. The workflow simulator is one of the best tools in Build because it allows you to test out the workflow, see what the emails look like that are going to get fired off. It allows you to make sure that stuff's getting sent to the right people. It allows you to test that in the system before this ever goes live, before you publish it, and without having emails and notifications get sent to people that you don't want it to get sent to while you're testing, say a dean. You don't want that information sent to a dean or the CIO, but you want to make sure it works appropriately. The workflow simulator can help here. So if I click run test, it'll prompt me to fill out the form, and it's only going to prompt me to fill out information that affects the workflow. We're not going to make you fill out your big long form for when you're just testing fields that affect the workflow. So we're going to say new department is going to be biology. And we're going to say this is our first time changing our major. And we're going to submit. Now remember, for the first time changing our major, it's going to go to the advisor for an acknowledgement. So we're going to pretend we're submitting the form. It notifies us, hey, you've got a couple of different routes here. You may want to just double check things. I'm fine, that's great. So then it will say, okay, advisor acknowledgement. Notice how it's highlighting which step I'm testing. This goes to Merle Maggio. Here's the email that it looks like to Merle Maggio. Now I can click begin review here to pretend I am Merle, or I can click next to go to the next step. We'll click begin review. And then I'll see the form as Merle sees. I'll be able to review the form, acknowledge that it's been completed. It'll say route complete, congratulations. Next, it will take me to that submitter approval notification. So Jamie Smith, your request to transfer to the biology department is approved. So all of my custom email wording and verbiage there is included. And then we'll go next. Now, this was the question, Rachel. So notice how on that branch, the conditions aren't met. So I'm going to skip over this step because I answered first time. I didn't answer 4 times. And then it will go to the integration where I can also see the advanced JSON for what's getting sent. And then we'll click next, workflow is completed, hooray! And then I can also view a status log. I'll tell you what the status log here is in just a second. Since I'm done, I'll go ahead and toggle back over to design. Shelly, how does the send back functionality work? Good question. I'm going to pause that question for just a second. I'm going to table it and come right back to it. And I'll show you a little bit more about that. All right, workflow. So the acknowledge step does require them to click acknowledge. It does not require. In the workflow simulator, it does, Crystal, just so that you can continue on with the path. But the acknowledgement, I mean, you could finish the entire workflow, it could be all completed and never have that person acknowledge it. So it is not required like approval is. Approval will stop at that step until it's been approved. So, yep, perfect. Okay, last 5 minutes. Documents. I'm actually going to jump out of this app so I can go to one that has documents. So same type of thing, major change request. Documents, the document list will give you a list of all of the documents, again, forms that have been submitted to this particular app, where you can search for certain forms, you can adjust your columns. So for example, I can expose or hide, the little eyeball will show a certain column, or if I click on it with the little slash across it, it will hide it. So you can adjust what columns you want to see. So a couple of things I want to point out: workflow total runtime, I'm going to expose; status and time on current step, I'm going to expose. So you can see workflow total runtime. This one's complete. It took 3 months to go through the whole workflow. Someone was asking about this, like, how can I see how long it's been stuck on a step, or can I notify someone if it's been stuck on a step? You can't, like I said, you can't notify anyone, but you can at least see here that the time on current step for this one, it's been 5 months. So there's Rosario here. I probably want to let Rosario know, like, she needs to approve this particular form. So I can see some of the statuses of these forms. I can even click on the workflow status and filter out by just the statuses that I want to see. So I only want to see stuff in progress, for example. I can even go ahead and save this filter and this view. So if I want, I can come back to my saved searches later and toggle between different views if that's helpful for me. Alvin, when you customize the layout, does it change it just to your layout or to all users? It changes it just to yours. However, under data settings, you can create a default view option that will be what the user sees, unless of course they change the columns and everything for themselves. The other thing you can do is when you've created a filter like I have, so you can see I've got my filter in various columns, I can share this view with someone. So if I click on this link, copy, and then send it to someone, they would be able to see this view. And then if I change the view and go back to share, it would be a different link, so they would have a different view. Okay. So there is that. Ignore my poor, let's see. Actually, I'm going to change this. We're going to show error. Ignore some of my bad spelling on here, guys. It's a little nerve-wracking when everyone's staring at you and you're typing. The question was asked, how does the send back functionality work? Okay, I'm still coming to that. I want to show you how you can see where something is at in the workflow process. You'll notice I have this form here that there's an error to it. Errors happen when, like, let's say I've got, there's multiple reasons why an error could happen, but a good example in what's happening in this case, I believe, is either someone doesn't have an email address or you've assigned this step to a particular role, but say the group doesn't have anyone assigned to that role. Like I know with my anthropology department, I don't have a department chair assigned, so I would get an error. So those are situations like that you can see in the system as well. If I click on my form, this will take me right to my form. And if I come over here to status and toggle over to status, I can see the entire workflow status. So you remember when I showed you that in the workflow simulator, it would allow you to see that in the workflow simulator. You can see it was submitted for approval by me on this date. It was then denied at the advisor approval step. And of course I did all this so because I was testing. And you could see my comment here, test 11, not the greatest comment, but you get the idea. Then it was approved by the department chair of Spanish and Portuguese. Then a notification was sent to the submitter, and then another notification was sent to those various individuals. So the workflow status will allow you to see where everything is at. Now, in our last minute, I know we've got a couple more questions coming in, so I'll hang on the line and answer some of those questions. If I go back to my action list, we talked about this yesterday, and if I go to one of my approvals, the question was asked, what about send back? If I'm an approver, I would see all my approval options over here. So I can approve, I can save my work and come back to it. I can send it back. Now, I can send it back to form submission, meaning that's the person who submitted it. Or what you can't see here is if I am an approver down the line, like the third approver, I can send it back also to anybody before me. So if I were the third approver on this step, I would be able to send back to form submission. And then I would be able to send, or I'd be able to send it to approver 1 or approver 2. I could add comments. That's where that test 11 came in. And they would be able to see that in the workflow status area. And then I would be able to send it back. I can also add comments on approve and deny as well. So those are some options. Now, I recognize we're at the top of the hour. Some of you have to go. So if you have questions, I'll answer them. Give me 1 sec. I just want to remind you all that we've got the build contest. So if you are not a build customer and you want to get access to a free app and try out build, make sure you get in on this contest and make sure you rate our sessions as well. And Socio, it's the right now button at the top of the screen. So if you have to take off, thank you for being here. I hope this was helpful. Let us know if you have questions. Our next session is at 2:15. It is our optimize campus processes, control the spread of COVID-19 through optimized campus processes. So we'll see you back here in 15 minutes. Questions in the chat window. I'm just going to keep going. So if you're sticking around, thanks for sticking around. Maddie, is there a way to filter by step that form is currently on? Okay, let's jump back into, nope, sorry. Make sure I'm going to the right place. Let's jump back into my form. I don't know if you can filter by step, but you can sort by step. And I think that's just the current time on current step. So I don't know if you can actually sort by step. Casey, or do you know, or Tad maybe? Can we sort by step or filter?
Looking at that now, it does look like you can sort it by A to Z or Z to A.
Okay, there you go. Michael, can approvers be required to add data to other fields? Yes, so you can turn on required fields in an office use only section. If you have required fields and it's not in an office use only section, then the form submitter would not be able to submit the documents. You just have to put it in the office use only section. And then the approver would not be able to complete the approval until those fields are filled out. Thanks, Paul. It's good to see you. Could you show us again how to add columns to the document view? Yes. So columns list here. And to hide columns or to expose them, you just click on the little eyeball. When it has the slash through it, it hides it. If you want to unhide it, you can just simply click on it, get rid of the slash, and it will show up. Good question. All right, y'all. Thank you for coming. You are wonderful. Have a wonderful day. Hopefully we'll see you here in the next 10, 15 minutes for our optimized processes. We'll see you later.